So I'm going to jump right into our topic today. Before I begin, just brief introduction. So my name is Heather Jordan. I'm the Managing Director for Emerge 360. We're a division of TrustPoint, and we do a lot of financial education as well as financial planning and investment management for individuals. Brett Sibian is our financial coach. He's not on the call today, but he also does a lot of the education and it's kind of has an investment focus. So any questions or anything you guys want to discuss with us, we're happy to meet with you and kind of go through your specific scenario after this call. So today I'm going to go over just basic, dates for retirement, things you should consider, and then things kind of outside of retirement and financial planning that you should start to consider as you get towards that retirement age. So to begin, just a couple basics. So there's tons of stuff online for different dates, different things. So we put together a graphic which shows major dates that you should be thinking of. And if you're close to these dates, kind of things you should be considering. So starting from left to right, 59.5 is typically when you can withdraw assets from your 401k without penalty. Check your plan specifically to see if you're still working, if you can withdraw, again, while you're still working, withdraw assets from your 401k. 62 is when you're eligible for reduced Social Security benefits. So everyone has a full retirement age. That age is the age you get 100% of your Social Security benefit. You are able to take it as early as age 62 or as late as age 70. And there's different pros and cons for taking it at different ages. Just know those are important dates to consider if you're approaching those ages. Age 65 is a really big date for Medicare. That's when Medicare, so healthcare, starts for retirees. If you retire prior to age 65, you're going to need to pay for private healthcare out of pocket, and typically that cost is pretty high. So if you're considering retiring again before age 65, make sure you work that into your financial plan or have that conversation with your spouse or partner to figure out how your healthcare is going to be covered until you get to that age 65 and can be on Medicare. Age 66 or 67 is typically people's full retirement age. If you just type in, what is my full retirement age to Google, there'll be a nice chart and it's based off of your birth year. Most people on this call will likely be age 66 or 67. Age 70 is the maximum age you can take Social Security benefits for the maximum benefit. So you have your full retirement age, which is likely age 66 or 67. Every year you delay it until age 70, there's a permanent increase in benefit. So again, different pros and cons for taking it early or taking it later. Again, work those into your financial plan as that's a really big decision to make as you enter retirement. Age 72 is typically when you would begin what's called required minimum distributions, or RMDs, from dollars that have not been taxed yet. New this year, I do have a note on here. If you turn age 72 after 12/31/22 and reach age 73 prior to January 1st, 2033, your RMD age will be 73. When you get close to this age, work with your advisor and make sure you know which age you have to start taking distributions, and thus which age you have to start paying tax on those distributions. And then when we do financial planning for folks, we typically plan for women to live until age 94 and men to live until age 92. So women on average live a couple of years longer than men. And that's why we think it's important that both spouses and partners kind of know the basics of your financial situation and financial plan. That way, if something happens to that other spouse or partner, you kind of have a basic roadmap to work off of. So there's things you can control and things you can't control in retirement. It's a very large decision that you are going to be making depending on when you want to do it, what you want to spend. And so we put together a graphic which shows things you should be focusing on and things that are out of your control, so to maybe put towards the bottom of your list. So things that you have the full ability control are your pre-retirement lifestyle, so your level of spending today, your lifestyle in retirement, so your vision of your retirement, and then your asset allocation and location. So this is how your assets are allocated amongst asset classes and tax sensibility. So things you should be focusing on are budgeting and kind of your goals for retirement. So what do you want to do in retirement? Do you want to travel? Do you want to buy new vehicles? Do you want to gift to kids or grandkids? Kind of having those discussions are really, really important. And those are all things that you can control, having that budget, making sure you stick to that budget. And if you need to make changes, doing that annually or anytime there's a major life update. A couple of things that you have some degree of control on are duration of employment and earnings, longevity, and then non-essential spending. So obviously you can some control over how long you work. Sometimes you have a health event or event where you can no longer work. You have some control over non-essential spending, things like that. Again, work all of these into a budget. I think that's a really good first step as you're thinking about retirement. What do you spend per month and per year, and how do your assets support that? And then things you're unable to control, so try not to worry about them. It's hard, but our market returns, tax policy and laws, and healthcare costs. So these are all things that we see people typically worry about the most. However, you worrying is not going to affect market returns, healthcare costs, and things like that. So it's important to be educated and know kind of typically what healthcare costs are, for example, or what typical market returns are, or what it could look like if we enter a recessionary period, how that affects your portfolio. Again, we can't control them, but we can try to plan for them and do our best to plan for those costs in the future. So how much do you need? We get this question from people all the time. How much do I need to retire? Is it $500,000? Is it $1 million? Is it 5 million? What's the magic number? Unfortunately, we don't have one number that we can give everyone, and that's because everyone has different goals for retirement and everyone has different, risk tolerances, how much risk they're comfortable taking in their investments. If you want kind of a general rule, 70 to 85% is the approximate income replacement ratio for estimating future retirement expenses. So likely in retirement, you obviously are not saving for retirement anymore. You might not have a mortgage anymore. You might not have a car payment anymore. So that's why it's estimated that you'll need 70 to 85% of income replacement. If you are still going to have a mortgage and still going to have a car payment, that number might be a little bit higher. The target annual savings rate for retirement is about 15%, and that is what you and your employer puts in your plan if you have an employer match or an employer contribution to your plan. If you're not quite at that 15%, don't panic. We always say that small savings can add up, and slowly increasing that over time can really make a big difference. So targeting that 15% contribution to your 401k or contributing to an IRA is a really good place to start. And then the cost for healthcare, this is ever changing with the cost of inflation, the cost of things going up so quickly. Kind of the estimate of what it will be is $300,000 to pay for medical costs through retirement. So it's more than people think. Not meant to scare you, meant to prepare you and make sure these costs are substantial, and it's really important to make sure you're saving enough for retirement and making sure you're keeping some of your other, travel costs, other non-necessary costs low so that you can afford healthcare, mortgage, things like that. A couple common mistakes we see in planning are shown here. The couple that I see probably the most often are retiring too early and saving too little, and assuming too little or too much risk. Oftentimes people come in for planning and they pick a date that they want to retire because maybe their friends did it, maybe their family did it, maybe they're hearing on the news, you should retire by 60 or 62, or pick whatever age you'd like. I think it's great if you want to retire at 60, 62, 65, 70, whatever works for you, but it's very, very important to plan for that. If you're someone who wants to retire early, so prior to your full retirement age, prior to 65, you're going to have to save more aggressively than someone who wants to work a little longer, maybe someone who wants to work into their 70s, or someone who doesn't have as many goals in retirement. So if you're planning to travel, gift to kids, grandkids, maybe support education for beneficiaries, you're going to have to save a little bit more aggressively than someone who doesn't have those goals. And then the risk, again, is very, very common. People either taking on too little risk or too much risk. So people get very nervous when markets are volatile, and we're seeing that, kind of in this volatile market time today. So, markets have been down. People are nervous. The best advice we can give you is to stay invested and kind of think of your long-term objective. So it's best not to move to all cash, even when markets are volatile. If you have questions about your specific situation, we're happy to help you as well. But in general, stay invested. It's really important that you have the proper investment allocation. So typically, when you get closer to retirement, you are a little bit more conservative than someone who is in their 30s, 40s, or 50s, who has a ways until retirement. They can be more aggressive. So as you shift towards retirement, potentially reducing the stock in your portfolio and increasing the bonds, and also building up that cash bucket. Again, not moving everything to cash, but making sure you have that emergency fund in place and making sure you have that just in case something happens and you need to draw upon those funds. So a couple of considerations as you begin to think about your own retirement. The first one is timing. This is the most important financial decision you can make regarding retirement. On average, people retire at 64. However, I will say I've seen people retire at 55. I've seen people retire at 73. I've seen people retire who then work part-time or go back to work to do something else that's a little less taxing. There's no hard and fast rule for when you should retire. It's just important to plan for it and make sure if you have a goal of retiring at X date that you take that into consideration with your different saving strategies. If you're someone who retires too early without planning for it, you're going to have that loss of future earnings and 401k contributions. So if you retire at 60 instead of 65, you're going to have 5 years where you're not contributing to your 401k and not saving extra for retirement. You may be forced to take Social Security prior to that full retirement age. So I mentioned before, you have your full retirement age. If you take it after that, there's a permanent increase in benefits. If you take Social Security before your full retirement age, there's a permanent decrease in benefits. So really, really important to make sure all of these things align. And then a big thing that we touched on before is just health insurance prior to Medicare. So Medicare, remember, is at age 65. If you retire before then, healthcare costs could be quite high. So maybe you have one spouse who keeps working and you both switch to that healthcare until you're 65. Maybe you get a part-time job that provides healthcare for you until you're 65. So just different things to think about if you're looking to retire early. The next decision is investment and allocation. So asset allocation is the overall mixture of stocks to bonds. I'm sure you've heard asset allocation before. That's just the amount of stocks and bonds and cash in a portfolio. This becomes more important than stock selection. So we have historical data out there that says the way you are invested, so what percent stock versus what percent bonds, has a bigger impact on portfolios than what specific funds you invest in. So really, really important to think about, as you get closer to retirement, typically you become more conservative, reduce your stock exposure, and increase your bond exposure. Very, very important to stay invested, right? You might be anxious, you might be nervous, you might want to pull everything out and just keep it in cash. The problem with that is it's really, really hard to time perfectly when to get back into the market. And you are going to need your accounts to grow. Even if you're in retirement, it's important to have them invested so that they do maintain a little bit of growth in there. So stay invested. Again, have a little bit of cash on hand, but overall stay invested in your IRAs, 401ks, things like that. If you are too conservative, so let's just say you move to all cash, or maybe you have all bonds or not enough stock in your portfolio, you're going to have loss of purchasing power because your portfolio isn't going to keep up with the pace of inflation. And then really, really important to grow that emergency fund. So while you're working, you should have on average about 6 months of expenses saved in this emergency fund. And that's in typically a checking account, savings account, something you can access quickly should you have an emergency. As you get closer to retirement, people typically have a little bit more cash in there just in case markets are down when they retire. So, for example, let's just say you retire when markets are down 25%. Instead of withdrawing these assets that are down 25%, you might decide that you can use some of this saved cash that's on the side and pay your expenses. And then when markets rebound, then start drawing from your investments. So this just gives you options in retirement, and make sure if markets are down when you enter retirement, you do have funds that you can pull from. So I touched on this a little bit before, but emotions and investing do not mix well. And this graphic, I think, perfectly explains that. So we're just going to look at the orange and the green bars. So the orange is the average investor. So this is a 20-year annualized return by asset classes from 2002 to 2021. So throughout that time, the average investor earned an average return of 3.6%. So the average investor is someone who does their own investing. They decide when to get in and out of the market and when to sell specific funds. If you would have invested in the S&P 500, the annualized return there would have been 9.5%. So the reason that this is such a big difference is that people get in and out of the market at all the wrong times because it's emotion-based for a lot of people. So some people get out of the market when markets are down and they get back in when markets are up. And that is not quite timing the market correctly. And it's very, very difficult to time it perfectly and know when to get back in. So stay invested, stay the course, make sure you have an appropriate stock to bond ratio. There are different investment strategies for different buckets of needs. So again, things that you need in the near term should be kept more in like a cash account, bank account. Things that are long term, so 15, 20, 25 years in the future, those can be invested more aggressively. So again, short-term needs typically held in cash, longer-term needs can be held more aggressively in stock. So retirement income and needs, another really hard question that people have a hard time answering when I ask them are, what are your goals for retirement? What is your monthly spending? What does that look like? What do you want to do in retirement? Do you want to travel? Do you want to do home improvement projects? Do you want to gift to certain charities? Those are all really, really important conversations, and kind of that is the building block of financial planning. So budgeting, it sounds very basic. It can be very easy, but it's really, really important to do it. So take out a sheet of paper. Maybe you have an Excel document on your computer, but it's important to look at fixed expenses versus discretionary expenses. Look at healthcare costs. So if you're getting that through an employer now, will you have to pay out of pocket later? What is Medicare cost for you? Things like that. Make sure you incorporate that all in your budget, and then take a look at your assets. So maybe you have 401ks or IRAs or savings accounts, things like that. I don't have the statistic off of the top of my head, but there's a shocking number of people who forget about old 401ks at old providers. So please, please, please don't forget about those accounts. They're very important, even if there's only a couple $1,000s in them. It's really important to keep track of those. If you have older 401ks from old providers, you are able to roll those into your current 401k. And a lot of people do that so that they don't forget about the account, and then they're both managed kind of consistently and in the same investments. So again, that question, how much do you need in retirement? So we talked about, that 70 to 85. This example is 75 to 80% of pre-retirement income. So in this person's example, let's just say they have annual spending needs of $100,000. So they've done their budget. They say, I need $100,000 per year to cover all of my expenses. They file for Social Security and they get $25,000 per year. So there's this gap of $75,000 that they need to draw from their investments to meet their annual budget. There's a basic rule of thumb, and it is the rule of 4%. This is saying that you can withdraw about 4% of your portfolio per year to cover expenses, and the principal of your portfolio should remain about the same. So this is give or take depending on, inflation, depending on market returns, things like that, but on average about 4%. So using this example, if you need this income of $75,000 per year to cover your expenses, this individual would need to have saved $1.8 million for retirement. So if you look at this example and you think you are going to need $50,000 per year in retirement, you can kind of adjust this. If you're someone who has maybe two spouses getting Social Security and maybe you get $40,000 of Social Security versus 25, that's an important consideration as well. So just a quick example of how much you would need to have saved if you need to cover that $75,000 gap. So spending is a significant risk. We talked about the 4% rule. Another big consideration is where to draw assets from. So people obviously like to remain in the lowest possible tax bracket. So there are different strategies for when to withdraw pre-tax money, when to withdraw Roth money, when to withdraw, a taxable account, funds. The overall goal is to remain in the lowest possible tax bracket. So that's where it's really important to work with a financial planner, work with a CPA, work with your investment advisor to establish a distribution plan to make sure you know what that could look like. Also, as part of your distribution plan is how you're going to get these funds. So some clients set up monthly distributions from their investment accounts to pay their bills. Some just request a distribution when they have a large expense come up, or some have quarterly, annual. So it's up to you, however it works best for you and to budget, but make sure you have a plan in place to cover where you're receiving funds from. We always like to show this graphic, and it is different ages and how much you should have saved for retirement. This is if you'd like to retire around age 67. So the way to read this is, let's just say you're 50 years old. You should have about 6 times your salary saved for retirement. If you're not here, it's not a time to panic. If you are here or above here, that's great. You've done a great job saving. I will say any even small increase you can make to how much you're saving into your 401k or an IRA is really going to make a big difference over time. Inflation. So we've heard a lot about that this year. When you are younger, you tend to not pay as much attention to it as someone who's entering retirement and you're on a fixed income, a fixed budget. You have a set amount of assets that have to last for the rest of your life. So here we've shown what inflation has been in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s. No one has a crystal ball and can say this is what it will be going in the future, but I did want to provide an example of what that could look like. So inflation is the cost of things increasing. So something that's $10 today is going to be much, much higher when you buy it in 20 or 30 years. So in this example, we have the inflation of $100,000. So $100,000 in today's dollars at 3% inflation. In 10 years, that's $134,000. In 20 years, $180,000. 30 years, $242,000. A good example of this is the cost of healthcare. So healthcare is inflating faster than everything else. So that's really, really important to incorporate into your financial plan and make sure your financial advisor is incorporating those healthcare costs accurately. I think it's shocking to see how fast things can add up. And again, as you enter retirement, this becomes more important because you have a set number of assets to last for a set number of years. And then know your benefits. So people, I think, do, their benefit enrollment through their employer, and then they don't think about it the rest of the year. But it's really important that you know your benefits and you understand them even at a basic level. So know your benefits for COBRA and life insurance and disability. And if you have an HRA, and if you have retirement plans, maybe you have a pension or an annuity and you're getting Social Security and you have Medicare, all these things to think about. All of these things go into financial planning. If you don't have a plan though, even if you just have like a Word document or an Excel document listing out all of your accounts, I think it'd be helpful to kind of keep yourself organized. So a couple other things to consider as you're thinking about retirement. So meeting with a financial planner is really, really important. They are an expert. They research changing laws, changing tax laws, things like that. They can help you make a plan and help you stick to it. So setting goals is really, really important. Reviewing your plan and then reviewing or updating your estate plan. That's one that I think people typically do. They're like, yep, I have an estate plan, and then they don't look at it again, even though things have changed. So we've seen people forget to add children in there. Maybe they have new charities they want to support and they didn't have those updated. So make sure you look at that every couple of years or whenever you have a major life change to make sure when you pass away, your assets pass to your intended beneficiaries. And then maximize your savings. So you can contribute to a 401k. Most 401ks have a Roth portion. You can contribute to an IRA, different things like that. I have the limits on the screen here. If you just Google what are the IRA and 401k limits for 2023, you'll be able to see that on there. If you're interested in an IRA, you are able to fund that all the way until the next year when you file your taxes. So if you wanted to contribute to an IRA for 2023, you could open it, and as long as you fund it by when you file your taxes, you can still contribute for the 2023 year. So we have some people who do that, or we have some people who contribute once a month to an IRA, once a year. Just know that that is an option. Taxable accounts are something that we haven't quite talked about tonight. Those are called non-qualified accounts. So not IRAs, not 401ks. These are accounts that you can invest in either by yourself or jointly with someone else. And the way that it's taxed is capital gains tax. So when you take a distribution, it isn't like an IRA where it's ordinary income tax taxed at capital gains rates, which are typically lower. So if you're interested or have questions about that, let us know. We can go into more detail about what that could look like, but it's a good option for larger purchases. So say maybe you have a goal to buy a car or maybe to build a house in a couple years or 5 years, 10 years, a taxable account is going to be a good option to save in. And there are no limits for how much you can contribute to those accounts. So if you want to contribute $5,000, great. If you want to contribute $100,000, great. There's no annual contribution limits. And then another option is you can do what's called a backdoor Roth. So there are income limits to be able to contribute to a Roth IRA. If you're over those income limits, you can do what's called a backdoor Roth. That's essentially getting around those income limits. So Roth 401k does not have income limits. Roth IRA does have income limits. Backdoor Roth is a way to get around those income limits. And then lastly, just wanted to cover kind of what we do in services. So we, as I mentioned before, do financial planning for clients. We do a full financial and retirement plan where we talk about your goals. We talk about all of your investments. We talk about when the optimal time to take Social Security is. We talk about, what's the best way to be invested? Should I be in this percent stocks bonds or should it be something else? All of those things that we talk about go into planning. We do offer investment management, so we administer IRAs, brokerage type accounts, joint accounts, revocable trusts, things like that. We are headquartered here in La Crosse, so we're a local team, and we do have some really great technology on board as well. So if you've listened today and you kind of have the gist of basic financial planning and you're interested in more in-depth, specific to your situation financial planning, we'd love to help, and feel free to give us a call. So thank you everyone for attending today. Again, just covered very high level things you could or should be thinking about as you enter retirement. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to call us or email us. Both are listed on the screen. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you at our next couple webinars next week. Thank you.